the big boy story of the day, and that is Dennis Allen being hired officially as the New Orleans Saints head coach. Now, this is not surprising. I would say I only had heard a couple of whispers that ever made me doubt that Allen was going to be the head coach, but at the end there was just too much inertia, too much internal momentum that just pointed towards it making sense for Dennis Allen being the head coach of New Orleans Saints. So we all know about the 8-28 record as the Raiders head coach, rare are second chances such as these. But in context, at the core of all of this, it's a very simple philosophy, right? And it's, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is a Saints team that has won the second most regular season games, Jake, in the past 5 years. So over half a decade, this has been the second best regular season team in the entirety of the NFL. That's a great sample size. And within that half decade, within that 5 years, so much of it goes back to what Dennis Allen did with that defense, right? I mean, when he took over in 2016 and 2015, you were dead last in everything. In year one of DA, Jake, you were 31st in points per game, 27th in yards per game. We'll just do the points per game rankings here. So 2016, you were 31st. In 17, they went up to 10th, and 14th, then 13th, then 5th, then 4th, okay? So at a time when your franchise was uber successful, one of the main correlating factors was a defense that was uber successful from awful, right? And who was the key behind that defense? Dennis Allen. And so now he finds himself as the head man in charge over there in Airline Drive.
Yeah, and so the 8-28 is going to be something a lot of people talk about when he was a coach of the Raiders, 2012 to 2014. And remember, he was still a very young football coach. I mean, still is. He's only 49 years old. I mean, he was in his 30s when he took over the Raiders, and it could have been Newt Rockne, Bill Belichick, Vince Lombardi, even Bud Kilmer. Nobody's going to win with that team. Matt Flynn sat over here on this side and said that roster was awful, and he was on that roster. I mean, he had no problems saying that. Now, it's something that you can't completely forget because it is 8-28, but at that time, it didn't matter if you were a player, if you were a coach. That's where your career kind of went to die, was Oakland. It was one of the worst-ran franchises in all of sports, not just the NFL. And so he had to rebound from that. That's why we're going, 8 years between head coaching jobs here, is because you were with the Raiders in the 8-28. But I think he has worked his way back, what he's done with that defense. And this tells you what we were all asking as soon as Sean Payton stepped down. Are you going to hit reset and start over, or are you going to try to stay in that window? We always talk about windows in the NFL. The Saints has been open for a very long time. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen when you have the most success in your franchise history for that long, 16 years. Now, I know it's been some 7 and 9 years, but they've never fallen off that cliff. Like, that just typically does not happen in the NFL. So what did they want to do? They wanted to keep as much of that as they could, and that's what they're going to do. Defensively, you're elite. You've got players. And I know they're aging players. They've still got 2-3 years left, in my opinion. So you want to get in that window for 2 or 3 more years and be elite on that side of the football. Now, the problem is when you hire the defensive coach to be on the elite side of the ball, the offense has got more questions than anything. Who's your quarterback? Who's going to be your second and third receiver? Is Michael Thomas going to come back? Now Alvin Kamara, that situation, like, what's that going to look like? Who's your tight end? Do you believe in Adam Troutman? The only thing that you really have that you feel really, really good about is a couple of offensive linemen.
Yeah.
Right? And so is Pete Carmichael going to be the guy? None of us know what that relationship between him and Dennis Allen, so obviously they've gone against each other day in and day out in practice. There's so many questions on offense that's the concern, not even because the other part of it you feel pretty good about.
Well, and it's funny because that's why I actually think I think the questions on offense, and I think, granted, this is a matter of interpretation. This is how I interpret it. I'm seeing a lot of people interpret the opposite, where I think the questions on offense actually push you towards Dennis Allen, right? Because I did see a lot of that yesterday. Well, how is hiring Allen going to fix the offense? Well, that's like right now, I don't think the offense is necessarily – I don't know that should be where your focus is, given that objectively the defense is the strength of this team, or at least this is what I'm trying to say. The defense is the strength of this team, right? So why risk throwing both sides of the ball into flux when you can kind of, let's reinforce what we're already good at and then let's figure out and be able to commit resources and be able to fix the offensive side of the ball as we go along, right? Like if you were to change, let's say you hire an offensive coach, you change defensive coordinators, you change over all of these things, there's no guarantee the offensive coach can fix an offense that doesn't have a quarterback, right? Because you have to find a quarterback answer. That's very hard to do. There's no guarantee an offensive coach can come in and fix an offense that I don't know what Alvin Kamara's status is going to be next year. We're going to talk about that next segment. Mike Thomas remains kind of the eternal unknown. So everything you just said, there's no guarantee that just an offensive mind will be able to come in and fix that. It's a far more likely bet that Dennis Allen can keep this defense very damn good, right? And then you still have offensive minds like Pete Carmichael and others that whether it's Jameis or who not, like they know enough from the Peyton era where they can bring guys in and they can have success there. So I don't think it's about Dennis Allen fixing this offense. I think it's about Dennis Allen keeping the best part of this team best, and that will make you playoff relevant, right? Because the offense is awful this year. I mean, they were god-awful.
Yeah.
And you went 9-8, okay? So that's what they're chasing. They're trying to keep that attack. My biggest thing here is how do you follow a legend? Like if you're Dennis Allen. And maybe the greater thing, is there precedent for this sort of situation? I mean, I was thinking, I don't think I have enough NFL knowledge just in the top of my head to think about to come up with any great examples. But I think anybody can appreciate this, Jake. If you're taking over from someone who has been great over the course of time, 16 years, and what's interesting is the specter of Sean Payton is still very much there, right? Everything we just laid out, the entire logic behind it is that Sean and the Saints have built such a nice foundation that is Peyton based that you want to try to keep that. Well, how do you keep all of that intact while still making it your own, right? That's a very dangerous needle to try to thread.
Yeah, we've seen this more in college football where you'll hire a guy who's been there for a long time as an assistant, never was the head coach, right? I think we've seen that in the college ranks way more than we have the NFL. So this isn't something that you have a lot of history to kind of go off of. And it's always, like you said, it's a good point. It's always how much do I take, but how much do I bring in myself?
Yeah.
Because you don't want it to be the same exact thing. You don't want to try to be a clone of Sean Payton because you're not him. He's not you. You're not him. So you want to keep like the good parts. And that's their job now is to separate, okay, the good parts that you want to keep, but also the new things that, because every coach has an ego. Dennis Allen has been in 7-on-7 or in a practice, in a 9-on-7 where he's like, man, we should be doing it this way. We should be doing it that way. Okay, now it's the time to implement those because this is your team. Don't do things exactly the same as Sean did. And, that experience, even though that experience as an NFL head coach, I think that helps him as well. He's not trying to figure out how to be a head coach. He's not trying to figure out on game day, who do I delegate to? Who does this? Who does that? He's at least been through that part of it. So his challenge now is to, okay, I've got to make this team in my mold. Like, what do I want the identity of this team to be? Because what you can take from Sean is great. It's fantastic. It's the personnel. It's some of the culture that they have in that locker room, which might be the best locker room in the NFL, but you also have to have new, fresh ideas and bring them in. So the offensive staff, who he hires as defensive coordinator is going to be interesting to me because obviously, he's the head coach now. I would assume he's probably going to still call the plays, but that's not a guarantee. I mean, Chris Richard might be somebody that they elevate to that position, you know? So there's a lot of hiring and staff moves that will kind of dictate what the identity of this team is going to be.
Yeah, and like the other thing in all this, and I do agree with you, and Loomis said as much about his experience of the Raiders. Like, you could say the 8-28 thing is maybe the biggest mark against him, but in Loomis's mind, like Jake said, it was actually a big positive because this is not a guy who's going to be overawed by, it's not his first time, basically. And I think the other thing you want to look at always when you're talking about hiring, right? And if you look at LSU's hires recently, Jake, and I mean, over the past few years, for the most part, this was a good indicator as to whether or not that coach was going to work out. There were exceptions, but for the most part, is there a market for that coach? And it's been a few years now where the Saints were potentially worried about losing Dennis Allen to be head coaches at other NFL franchises. So there is obviously a market for Dennis Allen, right? There are other teams that have wanted them to come in and be the guy in charge. And so if that's the case, then you can feel better about hiring that guy because you are not alone, right? I mean, everybody's getting paid millions of dollars to try to find who's going to be the next guy who's right for the job. And the hiring is horrible and hard, and it's fraught with peril. And so anytime you kind of get together and two sides are independently arriving at the same conclusion, which is Dennis Allen to be head coach, well, that makes you feel better about your choice. So why lose him somewhere else if he can be your guy? I will say this. I think it feels like the best choice. I just, again, over time, need to see, and I'm going to be fascinated to see how Allen threads that needle. How do you take over and like kind of maintain what Sean built while making it your own? It's tough to do. It is not impossible, right? You see it in CEO changes of major companies. Let's say like there's movie series where you have different directors on each movie, and a guy will come in and make it his own. It'll go well. So it's not impossible, but it's very tough to do, and I'm excited to see what Allen's going to be able to do.
Now, one of the questions that comes is quarterback. Are you going to draft one for the first time in a very long time in the first round? Or are you going to try to sign Jameis back? What do you do with Taysom Hill? And also, does Dennis Allen improve your chances to trade for a Russell Wilson or someone of that caliber? Because we talked about it. Like, Sean Payton not being there might have taken away some of the quarterback options just because Sean Payton and his history in the league and with quarterbacks obviously helps you out there. So that's the biggest question of the offseason. Now, I mean, with this Alvin Kamara stuff, that becomes a big question mark as well. But who the quarterback of the Saints is going to be? Because we don't know what Dennis Allen thinks of Jameis Winston. We don't know what he thinks of Taysom Hill, really. We'll find out, I feel like, pretty quickly in what he feels in those two players. He might want to draft a quarterback. So that position, you want to get that shored up as fast as possible because you want to have a leader on that side of the football. Defensively in that locker room, you've got not only leaders in that locker room in the Saints, you've got leaders of the NFL, guys that do stuff for the entire league, NFLPA and different things. I'm not worried about leadership on that side of the football, but you want to have a voice, a quarterback, hey, this is the voice of the offense type guy. Right now, with Kamara and his situation, Michael Thomas, who knows where he's at mentally as well, like you really don't have that.
Well, and to add to that, we also got to remember that Teron Armstead's in flux, right? I mean, he will be a free agent. You're going to be able to come up with the money to pay him. Can you pay him and pay Jameis and draft a quarterback and afford that rookie contract, right? Like, and then if you don't pay Teron Armstead, it's a very tough thing, right? Like when you're transitioning quarterbacks, the greatest asset that you can have is a really good offensive line. They can really ease that transition, especially your bookend tackles, right? Whatever. It's the reason why tackles make so much, the reason why pass rushers make so much. So being without Armstead, going through that, which and when you're talking about Armstead, you gotta, it's a big risk versus reward thing. Okay, how much is he worth? Availability. He's been hurt a lot, but at the same time, it's not like he's not tough. He's played through a lot of injuries. He played like really well through a lot of injuries. So again, like you said, Jake, offensively, everything is in flux. With the AK News, we're going to get to next segment. Literally everything is in flux. And so that is ultimately why Allen makes the most sense to me. On top of all the Sean Payton stuff, is simply that it keeps your strength strong and allows you to figure out the rest instead of having to figure everything out amidst it all. So we'll see, but let's talk about Alvin Kamara. As yesterday, the video came out, the police report came out, Alvin Kamara's statement came out, and so we have a very good idea of what happened in Las Vegas. We'll bring it down next here on Off the Bench.